All right, it's 10:45. Good morning, buenos dias, bonjour, good morning, and wataguan for my Jamaican attendees. Welcome to today's webinar, Understanding Data Privacy, Customer Trust, and How It Supports a Successful Strategy. My name is Leslie, and I'll be your host today. We have a fantastic agenda for you. We'll kick off with what you need to know about privacy, then we'll talk about why it's important from a strategy perspective, and then we'll open up for any questions. Just some housekeeping. A recorded version of this webinar will be available as well as the slide decks. It'll be sent out within 24 hours of the webinar, the close of the webinar. During the course of the webinar, we'd love to hear from you. We love participation, interactivity, and we would really much prefer a conversation. So please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A, and we'll do our best to get to every question. So I'd like to kick off today's conversation and introduce our first presenter, Rishi Maraj. With over 15 years of experience within the public and private sector and civil society, he has considerable knowledge and experience of the workings of government from both an operational and policy aspect. And deep insights into the challenges faced by civil society trying to impact civil change. During the period 2005 to 2012, he was a senior officer in charge of the Freedom Information Unit. He also provides technical advice in the passage and partial proclamation of the Data Protection Act in 2011. Wish this is very long. He also participated in drafting of the model legislation of the Freedom of Information and Data Protection through the ITU under the HIPCA project. Rishi Maraj is a certified member of the Canadian Institute of Access and Privacy Professionals and the International Association of Privacy Professionals. Rish, thank you for joining us this morning. You're widely considered the privacy prophet, as I like to call you, and definitely a thought leader. For the ladies that are joining us this morning, you might be thinking, Rishi looks familiar. Rishi, why is that?
Well, a little thing most people don't know about me, and not in the bio, is I'm actually involved in the fashion industry, kind of.
Fashion.
Fashion, yeah, interestingly enough. My wife has her own business, Simply Escape, where she does crochet, swimwear, jewelry, and accessories. When we go to markets in Trinidad, like Up Market and South Market and those different markets and stuff, I normally go with her, set up shop, and I'm there selling with her while we're at the market. So yeah, it's part of my other hat that I wear.
Model, Rishi.
Those days have gone, I'm pretty sure.
I think that's admirable. I mean, I've met so many women along the years. And let me finish the sentence before you judge me. That have given up their careers for family life. So I think it's great that you're very supportive of your wife and her own career. So Rish, can I hand over to you so you could set the stage for today's conversation?
Sure, thank you very much. Well, okay, so while I set up my slide, I thank you very much, Leslie, for this opportunity today to be able to present this very, I think, important and, up-to-date discussion on privacy. It's really something I think on the minds of everyone. Can you all see my slides? Yes? All right, perfect. So again, thanks everyone for this opportunity, and Leslie and his team to really talk about something that's very dear to me, the whole idea of privacy and trust. I think it's really important. I think in the environment that we're in now, where everyone now is thinking about, ways to survive and using digital as a way to survive, I think it's more so at the tip of every tongue, and something that I think board members and management needs to be aware of as they move forward in this whole new digital transformation era. I like to normally start off with this simple, but I think poignant quote by Warren Buffett. I think it's really important. And most of you who are in business have been in business for years, decades, some maybe even close to 50, 60 years. So you've taken that time to be able to build your brand effectively, build your clientele, build your business. People know about you. Families would come and do business with you from generation to generation. However, while it takes that long a time to really build a reputation in the world we're living in, within 5 minutes or less than that, probably a few seconds or a minute, a bad tweet, somebody breaching into your systems and being able to get in and take out information that you don't want, that could all be ruined very quickly. So while it takes a while to build a brand, build a reputation, build a clientele, in the era that we live in now, within 5 minutes or less, it can definitely go down the wrong path and hurt you tremendously in different ways. Now, in this presentation, I try not to be too jargonistic, so I try to keep my language very simple for people to understand. So let's look at the whole idea of digital economy and data. I think we all would agree, everyone, that data, at least over the last 20 years, more so over the last maybe 5, 6 years, has really taken off in terms of the amount of data points that exist right now that we interact with on a daily basis, from our vehicles that has GPS within it, that in the tracks where we go, from mobile devices, different apps that we have on our mobile devices. When we go online to shop, sometimes you'll just go on the web and make a simple search for something like, okay, that's interesting, no problem. And then afterwards, when you go on Facebook or elsewhere, you're proliferated with ads about the same thing over and over and over. Government is now starting to collect a lot of data on citizens as part of a citizen registry to allow for the ease of doing business in government. So, data is exploding, and the data real estate definitely and is exploding all over the world. And this just gives an idea, a snapshot of, the kind of digital footprint that we as individuals leave, but also a footprint of what businesses would normally have or capture or be able to have on an individual. Anything from your age, your marital status, your name, your email, what kind of car you drive, how often you change your car possibly, what clicks or downloads you do, what purchases you have, what's your average spend, if you have children or not. All these little pieces of data are captured in little nuances throughout our interactions with organizations. And organizations collect this data on a great basis. And it's now been said that near certainty, through different, actually there's 4 different data points, people can be able to ascertain exactly who you are without even knowing your name or anything like that. Just by looking at certain data crumbs that you may have left and they have access to, they can be able to actually do a good profile of you. And one of the best stories about this, I think, is the story that the Target issued many years ago on a research paper and was published. I think it was research or a book. And the article stated that Target made the claim many years ago that they can tell when a woman is pregnant before she knows, just by the data that they have and its change in spending habits and things that are going on. And then they use that to be able to market to her differently, the types of products and things that you should be interested in. So it's just, one, scary, I guess, for normal day-to-day people hearing these things, but 2, as a business, understanding the value of data to your organization, how data can be used effectively. And data means a lot to organization. I think in the 21st century, we're now moving towards that era. I mean, data helps you make better decisions. It helps you solve your problems. It helps you understand performance, what products are selling well, what products are not selling well, what we need to do to adjust. It helps you understand your customers, their likes, their dislikes, what's important to them, if things are changing in their lives that maybe you need to know of and things. And we've often been told many times that data is the new oil, but I know something that I like, I know Leslie likes this saying too. It's not really the new oil, but it's really a soil, something that you can plant into and grow and germinate over and over again, different types of results or different types of products and services to be able to help you as an organization. So data is really there now, and it's a new, I won't say it's a new way, it's been there for a while, but organizations are now waking up, I think, especially in our Caribbean space, to understanding, the value of data to us as an organizations in the Caribbean. So, I mean, and this comes out of a Cisco report that was done just in 2020 this year, published, I think, in January or February, where they've said now that data privacy has now evolved into, it's really a board-based decision, a business-based imperative. Because with all this type of data that you have, a lot of that data will also be personal data, customer data, client data, employee data. So it's not just customers and clients, but employees. I mean, we are all also employees of our own organizations. So it also impacts us in terms of data that organization holds on us as employees. So it's really, it's really moved away now from just data to understanding the kinds of data. And privacy now has really exploded. It's something that's been around for a while in the EU with the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, that the EU has really been championing this for a while. But I think, in my opinion, I think this really started to explode the whole idea and the conversation about data and privacy and the invasion of privacy and the use of or the improper use of personal data by organizations. I think at the end of the last US election in 2016, when we saw the whole explosion of Facebook and Cambridge Analytica and the use of data in different ways to be able to push you in certain ways to be able to, and now we've seen a lot of, I think movies are now coming out. Netflix did one recently, I think on social, I don't remember the name of the movie, I actually saw it, but it deals with the whole idea of data and people using data to be able to push you one way or the other. So people, I think, are becoming more aware of this, moreover. And consumers, and this, so the one before, the slide before, focused on business, and then Cisco did one focusing on the consumer, on what consumers feel about consumer privacy. And it found now that consumers are now becoming more aware of their privacy rights, and they choose to more proactively work with or interact with or buy goods and services from organizations that they can trust. So see that word trust coming back again, and are responsible with their data. And I'm now actually beginning to see that a lot with customers here. I mean, people I know when I do these presentations to people, at least for the last year and a half, 2 years, and afterwards, when they go to a company or go to a shop or supermarket and they sign up for a loyalty program, they now begin to ask the question, well, why do you want all this kind of data? What's the use of all this thing? So people, I think, are now waking up, to the kinds of data they provide to organizations, and they're now willing to do business because I think people are aware. In order to get goods and services, we do need to give up certain amounts of our data, our names, our addresses, or certain types of data, sensitive data, to get certain goods and services. But they're now becoming aware of and want to make sure companies, they can trust them with the way they collect it, use it, store it, share it, transfer it, so that, I'm sure that my data is not being used for purposes I did not want it to be used for. So if you're an organization, that's all nice to know with regards to personal data. Customers are aware of these things. We see laws being weird, but how does this affect me? So what questions should I be asking, with regards to data on the whole, and then personal data in terms of how it shapes me as an organization. So for me, there are 7, basic questions that you should be asking yourself as an organization. One, I think, would be, where does our data live? Who do we collect our data from? Where does it, when we collect it, who uses it? What are the different touch points that we have with that data? Where's the data stored? And when we look at data here, I want to make sure and drive home the point, especially when you look at these particular laws. It doesn't just focus on data captured electronically. We also talk about data in a hard copy environment, data that you fill out a form, you sign it, you submit the form in, and those forms or those paper-based data are still kept in the organization. So it's not just electronic data, but it's also data in a hard copy, paper format. So, where does this data live? Where do we store this data? Is it stored in servers? Is it stored in file cabinets? If our workers, on a normal day, have the data in in the files on their desk going through it, at the end of the day, when they, at the end of the work day, when they're finished with it, do they put it away securely, or do they leave it on their desk that anybody passing by in the evening, cleaners, whatever, can open it up and see different things? So where exactly does our data live? And who has access to the data, within the organization? Who are the ones who are able to access your data in the organization? If you're electronically, for example, who are the different touch points? Who are allowed to access certain types of data? Are there security controls in place that says who could get what? Do you have ways to allowed to be able to see exactly who accesses your data? Number 3, what pieces of personal data is necessary? And this is now a term that is being used in data privacy, is the whole concept of something called data minimization. Do we really need to collect all the data that we have, or that we say we need to collect? Obviously, many organizations believe, yes, the more data we collect, the better. But do you really need all of that data? Or do we just need to collect exactly what you need? And laws are now are forcing that, no, I wouldn't say forcing, but are now putting that within the legal framework. You only collect the data that you need. So what data is necessary for us to do our business? Do you really need to know my birth date, my birth certificate, PIN number, blood type, all these different things, and collecting information about me to deliver goods and service? So you need to really focus on the types of personal data and if it is really necessary for you to be able to collect that kind of data. What are the consequences if personal data is compromised? Now, normally, when we look at risk, most people in looking at risk and analyzing risk normally analyze it from a organizational point of view. What's the risk to the organization? Well, data protection legislation is now switching that a bit. And you now have to look at it from the risk point of view from the customer. What are the consequences to this data if the data is compromised? And we see that, more than 63% of breach costs for actually have a loss of business within it. And Cisco, in their study, when they looked at it, realized that, breaches cost money in terms of customers realizing, listen, I can't trust you with my information. I can't trust you with my data, so I'm going to move my business elsewhere. So what are the consequences if personal data are compromised? And of course, that goes with what kind of data? Most people may be embarrassed. Most people, it may lead to discrimination on their part, if that data is breached. So what's the compromise to your customer? Not only looking at the organization, which is important, but also looking at the customer, Are we a potential target for a breach? Given the types of personal data that you collect and you use, are you a target for a breach? And most IT people will tell you, that it's not just somebody with a hoodie over their head in a dark room looking to hack into your business and hack into your information. Most breaches are caused internally by internal staff, not because they want to, but there are certain circumstances. They may bring a USB from home or somewhere, it's infected with a virus. They plug it into your system, all of a sudden your server is compromised. They're using their laptop, especially now. We have a lot of people now working from home and accessing their organization from their home. So that may have, if their viruses aren't up to date, or if security protocols on their devices aren't up to date, that's also a possibility of you having a breach, somebody getting in through the back door. So, are we a potential target for breaches, and what are some of the things we can use to plug those gaps to ensure that, we don't become a consequence of somebody breaching us, or, staff using stuff, they're not supposed to be using, or accessing sites that they're not supposed to be accessing. Are we ready to provide evidence of compliance to regulators? We're now seeing in the world, countries are now slowly moving towards the adoption of data protection laws. And I'll get to that in a slide later on. So are you as an organization, if and when it does happen within your organization, do you now have systems in place to be able to adhere to regulators, assure them that you are complying with data protection laws? Are your plans for adopting new technologies and analytics in sync with emerging global privacy regulations? Everybody's now going digital. Everybody's now developing an app or developing a website or developing other means to be able to contact customers to deliver goods and services to them one way or the other, especially with the pandemic and people working from home or people not, going out as often. Those new technologies, are you taking into consideration privacy into them in terms of, what kind of information you're collecting? Is the information that's being passed to you, is it encrypted in transition? Is it encrypted when you're storing it? Those are now the best practices that exist. We have now ISO standards that are now coming about in terms of developing your own privacy information management systems. So as we move towards adopting new technologies and new practices and new analytics, are we aware of what are the global, not only the laws, but the best practices? And are we putting those things or building those things into our businesses or new technologies as we roll them out? So you've heard me talk about the whole idea of data protection, data privacy. But what exactly is this whole notion of data protection or data privacy? So first of all, before I get to that, I want to distinguish between data protection, data privacy, and data security, because most people will say, well, we have security, we have all these things in place, so why do we need data privacy? Well, they're two different things, but they work hand in hand. So data security, I'm going to go to the one below first. Data security is about protecting your data that you already have from access, from being used maliciously and everything like that. So data security is really important. Data privacy, however, talks about policies and practices in place that dictates how you collect the information, how you use the information within your organization, how you share it, what's your different touch points. If you have to transfer the information elsewhere, you're using cloud service providers or something like that, and share it. How do you share that information or transfer that information? So, for me, data security and data privacy are both critical. It's not a zero-sum game where one is more important than the other. For me, I take the view, and many academics and many people out there who look both at data privacy and data security are both all of the opinion. They're both important and crucial to bulletproofing any data protection program that you're going to have within your organization. So it's not a zero-sum game of one versus the other. Well, to have security, you have to give up privacy. Or to have privacy, we can't have data security. They can work hand in hand. So it's about bulletproofing your organization as best as possible and working together from a data privacy point of view and a data security point of view. So the general views of data privacy is very simple. People understanding now, and I've said this before in the beginning of the slide, are really becoming aware of the personal data that they share with organizations and want to ensure that the organization that they share their data with, trust in that organization that they share data with, so they use it appropriately and as best as possible. Right, let's go and see something there in a second. Right, so at the same time, so people are now becoming more aware of their rights under data protection or the kind of information they share, and they're really concerned about doing business only with those organizations that they can trust and share the information with. And that is now becoming, I think, not only global, but in the Caribbean, we're slowly starting to see that trickling one way or the other. So data protection is about safeguarding your fundamental right to privacy. I think everybody would agree that we have a certain level of right to privacy, from a customer point of view, from a client point of view, from an employee point of view. So data protection is about safeguarding those rights and safeguarding the kinds of data that we put out there, because we're now starting to see that the data in the wrong hands or being used maliciously can really have an impact on people one way or the other. So this is a general definition of data protection. This is actually my definition that I've come up with after all the readings and everything that I've done with regards to data protection, data privacy. For me, data protection really is the right to protection from unreasonable intrusion. And you see I have that highlighted and in red. It's protection from unreasonable intrusion into some areas of affairs for which no explicit consent was given or for which one has a reasonable expectation of privacy. So in this definition, I come from the point of view that, yes, in order to interact with organizations, to do business, to get goods and services, any way you take it, we need to have some level of, we need to give up some level of information about ourselves. If you're looking at in the banking sector, you need to give up information about, your name, your address, sometimes financial information, because we're now coming with AML laws and financing laws for money laundering. So you need to give up certain types of information for certain activities. Health information, if you go to your doctor, if you go to your lawyer and you're interacting with a case, you give up certain types of information that may be considered personal or may be considered sensitive. But what data protection is about is not having unreasonable intrusion. So you trust that the lawyer, the doctor, or the business person or the business organization that they're given the information with would use that information only for the reasons that they needed it and collect it, and that they would not use it with any other way without your consent, to be able to invade your privacy. So it's all about consent, reasonable, giving out the information and using it properly. So again, it comes back to that whole notion of me trusting you with the information I give you to be able to help me as best as possible, to be able to provide things to me as best as possible. And because of that, we now have a lot of laws that are now being impacted throughout the world. And one of the big ones that came about in 2016, but only became effective in 2018, is the GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation, which was passed in the EU in 2016, but came into effect in May 2018. And the main goal of the GDPR is to give control to citizens and residents over their personal data, and to simplify the regulatory environment for international business by unifying regulations within the EU. So the EU more or less has always had data protection laws in place, but they realize and they look at it that it was very ad hoc in the way each country dealt with data protection. So they came about and developed. It took about 3 or 4 years to come up with the actual language for the GDPR, and they passed it in 2016, and they gave organizations in the EU 2 years to be able to come compliant or to be able to put things in place to comply with the laws. 2 years on, we're in 2020 now, so it's 2 years since the laws became effective, and we still see organizations still struggling, still coming to terms with GDPR and what they think that they have to put in place to be able to be compliant with GDPR. This is just a quick snapshot, a one-pager, on explaining exactly what GDPR is. I wouldn't go through this in detail, but you see that GDPR really touches on different aspects of the way you deal with data in terms of having a legitimate basis for the data, retention, how long you hold the data. You must have clear, explicit consent. They've gone a lot more into children's data and how you use the data on children to be able to collect children's data, having privacy notices on your websites, how we deal with data breaches. For example, GDPR says once you've been breached or subject to a data breach, you have 72 hours to be able to contact the regulator and let them know you've had a breach. And you also have to contact your data subjects or the clients and customers to let them know of the breaches. Also, third-party management, how we deal with vendors, third-party vendors with regards to sharing data. And then the part down here, GDPR non-compliance, you can be fined up to 4% of your global turnover. So they've really impacted a lot on companies to be able to hit them where it hurts, which is their financial pockets. If you don't comply with us and you don't comply with the law and certain things happen, then you could be fined. And we've seen, at least in the last 2 years, fines being handled to companies in the billions and millions of dollars for breaches of GDPR. So people will be saying, well, okay, well, that's Europe. What does that have to do with me? Well, the language of GDPR is such that actually what GDPR more or less states, and what the courts in the EU have stated on several rulings on this, is that the rights enshrined to EU nationals under GDPR travels wherever the data goes. So GDPR has now become extra jurisdictional. So no matter which country you're in the world, once you're dealing with or collecting data or targeting EU nationals, then you have become subject to GDPR, and you have to be aware of GDPR and apply the laws and the policies and practices that GDPR puts within it. And that, I think, has now taken a significant impact on different countries, because we now see countries around the world beginning to adopt that same model language in their legislations. Just about a month ago, Brazil implemented their data protection laws that they have modeled on GDPR, which now says that if you're collecting or using data or targeting Brazilian nationals, you have to comply with our laws. And their laws have now been modeled under GDPR. So GDPR has now become the gold standard. In the US, you have something called the Californian Consumer Protection Act, the CCPA, which also is GDPR-like in the word and its language of if you're dealing with Californian nationals, citizens in California, you have to comply with our law. What does that mean for the Caribbean? Well, the Caribbean also has its own data protection laws. Trinidad and Tobago, we passed our Data Protection Act in 2011. That's before GDPR. And currently, the government is now taking steps towards revising our laws based on GDPR. In Barbados and Jamaica, Barbados last year and Jamaica just in May of this year, passed their own Data Protection Act. And when you look at the language of that act, it's actually based on GDPR. Actually, both Barbados and Jamaica in their acts state that if you are targeting Jamaican nationals or Bajans as part of your business, even if you're not based in Barbados or Jamaica, you all also now have to comply with our laws. You see similar language now coming in play. And we also have other countries that also have data protection laws that predate GDPR, like Antigua, Bahamas, Bermuda, Cayman Islands, etc. Interestingly now, there's now a growing movement in the Caribbean. Just about 2 months ago in August, ECLAC, which is a body of the United Nations, actually had a meeting with senior government officials from governments all over the Caribbean. And one of the things in that meeting was to actually getting governments or moving governments towards passing data protection laws in tune with GDPR. And why I say that is because a lot of trade agreements that we're now negotiating with the EU or with Canada, for example, actually within those trade agreements, they actually have within them clauses within the agreements that stating, if you want to do business with us in the EU, or if you want to do business with us in Canada, then you also need to have within your jurisdiction, within your laws, data protection laws that protect data of our citizens that you may use or that may come towards you from our countries. So countries are now slowly moving towards passing or amending existing laws to bring it in line with GDPR, which I said is now like the gold standard. So we know about data protection, what it means. We know, customers are now becoming aware of it and the impact of it and the trusted organizations that deal with it properly. So why is it a must for business? Well, I don't think anybody on this call would want to wake up in the morning and see these headlines with their organization's name on it. Hackers hit cyber attack or data breach for organization X or organization Y, or data has been compromised and our customers' data is now out there under ransomware or whatever. I don't think anybody wants to wake up really, or any CEO or any board member wants to wake up and read this in a newspaper or on an email or getting a call from a news media person saying, well, we've just heard that you've been attacked. What does that mean for our customers? What does that mean for your clients? Because something like that could have potential impact. And these are just four, but they could have a lot more. So potential impacts are regulatory and legal. You may have consequences based on laws that impact on you that you will have to deal with. Brand name and reputation is also important. Remember, I went back at the beginning, the first couple of slides I put up with Warren Buffett. 20 years to build a reputation, it could be all disappear in an instant. Your brand name, your reputation name can be destroyed. And in the same Cisco report that I mentioned earlier, they actually saw where companies that were subject to data breaches actually saw a 75% or 60% drop in business because of that, because customers left them, people pulled out of business, or people who were working with them or partners, pulled out working with them. So, and that leads to financial impact on the business. We saw with GDPR, and similar legislations are now impacting you in your pocket. 4% of global profit. So even if you're a multinational organization, but the breach happens in your branch, say in St. Lucia, something like that, the fine could be on the global revenue, not just the branch in St. Lucia. And then you have, of course, domestic and international issues or impact with regards to partnerships you may want to go with or different things like that. So there are definitely major impacts that, these data breaches could have on organization. And obviously with COVID-19 and the impacts it could have on organizations, people working from home, employees are now being asked to, as part of their day-to-day routine, if they're coming into the organization, lodge, where have we gone so far? Who have we been in contact with? What the different places we have traveled? And I know, for example, ministries of health in different parts of the region have been asking for this data. And some organizations are like, well, look, this is kind of personal. And unless they have tested positive for COVID-19, why should I give you this information? So we're seeing our battle between health and privacy, and public interest being happening. I can't tell you if that is right or wrong, but there's definitely a debate going on right now with regard to healthcare, COVID-19 pandemic, privacy, public interest, and all these things. So these are real issues that organizations and the world are dealing with these days. And having data is a good thing, but it can also be a risk to your business, because collecting and storing too much personal data, that could be risky, because then you open up yourself to major breaches or people coming in and taking or getting access to that kind of information, or you actually have now built up the kind of risk that you have upon yourself. Using personal data for unauthorized purposes, because now with that amount of data, people could use it for different things. You don't know what people may have in their mind to be able to access it and use it. You become vulnerable. Insufficient procedures around access to the data. Insufficient processes for deleting the data. How do you delete the data? Do you just give it off to a third party and hope they delete it for you? Or do you actively see how the data is deleted and get information or get some kind of report from them. Responses around data losses. Do you have proper breach things in place? Lack of transparency, sharing data and third-party data, their due diligence. Do you do due diligence with your vendors, who you share data with, to ensure that they also have proper data protection practices in place? So this is where I think data protection programs or having some programs within your organization to deal with data protection can actually bring value. They help with compliance, first of all. Two, they help you to understand your touch points of your data in the organization. They can help prevent breaches that hurt business, because now we know exactly where your weak spots are in terms of who's touching it, where it goes to, who has access to it. So now you can put things in place to mitigate against that. Actually, others saying, okay, no, these people or these businesses aren't supposed to have access. So you've locked off that. So you've created a stopgap measure there. It helps to improve brand value, because as we've mentioned before, people feel who they can do business with. They trust that you deal with their data properly. It can strengthen and grow your business. It improves public trust. It improves investor trust. It builds loyalty. It supports innovation, because now with having privacy as part of your thought process in developing new ideas from websites to apps or different ways, it definitely helps and supports innovation, because you're showing that we trust and value the kind of data we collect and treating it properly. It also helps to engage in partnership with other organizations, because you can show, listen, we are GDPR compliant, or we are ISO compliant with regards to privacy. So that makes you more attractive to businesses that may want to do business with you. So different approaches, you can take different approaches to dealing with it. For me, I like a simple, easy, effective way to deal with data protection, have data protection programs in the organization. So for me, it's a very simple 5-step process. Awareness, building up awareness within the organization, doing an assessment and an audit to see exactly where we are now, what things we fall weak in, and what things we have to address in that gap assessment. Doing a planning, having a proper data strategy or a privacy strategy within the organization. Executing a plan, policies, procedures, training, like I said, over and over and over again, because your weakest point often your staff, so staff needs to become aware of this. Data protection is not just a tick the box kind of measure. We say, okay, we have a privacy notice on the website, you have a privacy policy, we have these things in place. You have to practice what you preach. And the only way you can practice what you preach is your staff needs to become aware of it and be part of it, because they're always your first point of contact with your customer or your clientele. So they need to be a part of it. They need to embed it within the way you do business in the organization. It needs to become part of the culture of the organization, and then manage it and evaluate it over and over again. This is not something you could do now and say, okay, we're good to go for the next 5 years. As Leslie would tell you, technology is always advancing. Different ways to impact on people and to hijack people's organization is always there. So you always need to be on top of the game every single day, every single month, every single year. And this is where you have people within the organizations who are aware of it to be able to keep you up to date exactly what's going on. So quick and easy. I know I've talked a lot. Privacy should be viewed, for me, it's a business issue and not just a compliance issue. So you need to think strategically about transforming privacy into your business to give you that competitive advantage. And from a dollars and cents approach, to me, it makes sense. If you're proactive now, spend a little now, you save a lot in the long term, from lawsuits, from damage to your brands, from customers pulling away and doing business elsewhere. So it's about spend a little now, save a lot on the upfront, or you don't spend it now and then something happens later on, and then obviously it impacts you greatly. So with that, I would like to thank you very much for listening to me, and I'm happy to answer any questions or things you may have. I know it's a lot, but for me, it's just take a deep breath, digest it, and you just start the journey as best as you can.
Hey Rishi, thank you so much. That was very, very insightful, and I really like how you distill it at the end there, and it's ultimately about how do we drive business value, and it's not just a checkbox. So for those folks who just joined us, welcome. We're discussing the importance of understanding data privacy, customer trust, and how it supports a successful strategy. I'm here with Rishi Miraj, Executive Director of EquiGov, and Adam Sadler, Group VP Insurance Operations of Guardian. So In speaking yesterday, Rish, very, very insightful. You did mention something to me, and I was curious as to find out as to, how many organizations understand the impact of data protection on themselves. What's the business value of doing these things? What's the risk? So I just want to set up a quick poll, and I just want to launch the poll. I'll open it up. It's anonymous, guys. But could you vote in the poll? Of the organizations that are present, have you ever conducted a data protection impact assessment? Okay, great. So we have about, I'll give you guys a couple more seconds. We have 27, 28 votes. I rolled it up to 75%. 2 more votes. All right, cool. So thank you guys. So let me just share those results. So Rish, of the organizations present, 21% have conducted a data protection impact assessment, 36% have not, 43% are not quite sure. What do you think about these figures?
I think it's par for the course with regards to organization. I think, like I said, it's something new in the Caribbean. It's something that we're now slowly beginning to see organizations really seeing the value of it. So again, as I mentioned in the presentation, most people or most organizations, when they look at risk, they look at it more from an organizational point of view. But what a DPIA does is that it forces you to look at the risk also from a client point of view, a customer point of view, your data subjects. Mm-hmm. So I think it's something that organizations may have heard of in the past. Except 21% has done it, so that's great. But for those that are unsure, again, most people aren't sure. Like, what is actually a DPIA? Should I be doing something like that?
Yeah, very, very compelling numbers. So only 20% of the persons surveyed today have done that. But if I ask the question, how many people are using data to drive strategy, it'll probably be at 100%. So this is something certainly of consideration. All right, thank you guys. Okay. So now I'd like to turn over to Alan. Alan left Trinidad at the tender age of 18 to attend university in the UK. He qualified as a chartered accountant in England, and he managed to stay there. I don't know how he dealt with the weather for so long, but for a total of 30 years. One of his first stints was at Legal and General as the head of investments, business finance department. And then he moved on to a small bespoke technology media investment house as head of their back office function, including finance and ultimately in the public sector for a subsidiary of Her Majesty's Treasury on PFI and PPP infrastructure transactions as a financial and commercial expert. He's also an MBA from Cranfield. So Alan returned to Trinidad in 2013 to take up the role of finance director at Answer Merchant Bank Limited. He moved on to group CFO just within a year. And in December 2015, he joined the Guardian Life for the Caribbean as a VP of Finance and is currently Group VP Insurance Operations, responsible for the rollout of the digital transformation projects. So Alan, it sounds like at one point in time, you control the purse of the Queen.
I was a very, very small cog in that wheel.
Yeah, it was just a very, very big puss.
Yes.
So Alan, thank you for joining us. I mean, Alan, if we look at your bio, right, you're a finance guy, you're a numbers guy.
Yep.
And I'm sure that's why you're tasked with leading the insurance ops transformation that's happening at Guardian. And for those, who probably haven't heard of Guardian, that might be 0.1% of the audience. Guardian is, one of the largest players in the region. They operate across the entire Caribbean territory. And Alan has had that complexity to deal with. And in ensuring that the Guardian Group is transforming the way that they do business, data was pivotal to them. But Alan is not a risk guy. He's not a lawyer. Alan, so tell us, how did privacy and trust become important to you? And can you walk us through that journey?
Sure. Okay, good morning, everybody. So we undertook we undertook quite a large transformation for the entire group right across the region. So as you say, Leslie, we have all the way from Bahamas through Jamaica, all the Eastern Caribbean, Trinidad down through Curacao. Okay. So Curacao is interesting because it means that as a group, we're covered by the GDPR, which Rishi has just so scarily set out in terms of all of its requirements. So what when we're undertaking a transformation, there are three stakeholders you look at primarily. One, the shareholders. You're looking to make sure that the project is actually going to be successful. Two, you want to make sure that your staff are well looked after, have interesting jobs, and actually enjoy coming to work. And thirdly, and what we've made the most important of the three, is our customers. So a lot of what we've done for digital transformation is looking at how we interact with our customers, what our customers get from us, and how do we make it better. So we're very lucky we started before all of the COVID drama. So we'd actually started to digitalize a lot of our touch points with the customers. We've adopted Agile in terms of rolling out our project outputs, our outcomes. But again, everybody has to remember that as an insurance company, we are regulated here in Trinidad by the CBTT, and in the various territories by the regulator in that territory. So we are actually quite highly regulated, and therefore we are used to actually having to comply with regulations, and not just with the regulator, but all the anti-money laundering, all of the FATCA stuff. So we structure our projects around compliance and regulation anyway. What we actually found is, I mean, Guardian is big, so we were actually taking customer data both electronically and physically. So we had that complexity to think about, which Rishi has actually gone through. So in actually looking at all of the potential risks, etc., the risk register started to get rather large. So what we did is we sat back and we did an impact assessment. So again, straightforward approach to any project. We collected the requirements. We looked at what we would need to have for each region and what those requirements were for compliance. We then engaged Rishi to actually come in and do a risk assessment for us. So what we then, again, simple, what we need to be, what we are now, gap. And therefore, what that gap assessment allows us to do is start to look at what our roadmap is for actually getting compliant along data privacy. So on one side, I have technology developers trying to work as hard as possible. But on the other hand, I have to make sure that everything that is built is compliant. Everything that is built enhances staff. Everything that is built enhances our bottom line. So it's very important. I mean, if you ask any project manager whether satisfying their stakeholders is important, they're obviously going to say yes. And data privacy becomes, or data compliance becomes a big stakeholder for us in terms of the success of any project. So in terms of strategy, it just becomes a very key, crucial element of how we structure, what tasks are attacked, the timelines for everything. And as I said, it's just about making sure you know as much as possible. As you said, I'm not a lawyer. I am not a data expert in any way. What I'm trying to do is just take this from a strategic point of view and say, okay, it is a constraint. It is something we need to know about. So again, to reinforce what Rishi has been saying, what we've actually said is, okay, so we'll build a roadmap of how we actually comply, what we build and how do we structure it to comply. But like anything else, if we are busy trying to make our customer facing staff better at interacting with customers, we have to appreciate that data privacy, data compliance is not about getting a data team and just making them responsible for all of it. It is to make sure that it's a dynamic mover. It's an important part of your mindset when dealing with people. And so what we've actually tried to do is having operationalized all of the areas of the roadmap. What we're now doing is socializing the concept so that the CSR, in the same way, they're responsible for interactions with the customer and making sure the customer is getting the max that we can give them. We have to make sure that what we give the customers also complies. So it is to make sure that, as I think Rishi said it in his presentation, it is about making it part of your day-to-day life. So it isn't about you know when you get a legal contract in, you take it, you throw it at legal and say, review that please. I want to know what that means for us. For data compliance, I can't do that. I don't want a data compliance team alone. I need everybody on the ground who's actually handling customer data, who's actually interacting with customers, who are actually transferring data from one point to the next. They all need to understand. Hence the fifth part of our project being a socialized element to make sure that we all understand the part that we play as a whole. Okay. One of the things that, well, one of the many things that Rishi has gone through is all the benefits that that data will give us. All right. So again, as you said, nobody is trying to digitize or improve or innovate, which is what we're making the core of this entire program, without actually realizing that we absolutely need data. So everything that we do, we have, as an insurance company, we have legacy systems. I don't think sometimes people understand just how difficult it is. A life insurance customer could be our customer for 40 years, easily 40 years. And so you have to be mindful of that data for that period of time. So you have to make sure that the compliance around that is extremely tight. Migration from that is actually a gargantuan task. So what we've been trying to do is actually build around it at the edge. So again, what you have is data transfer that you have to then be very cognizant of. How does that data move? Who has access to it? What is it actually going to supply for you? So, yep, great. If we innovate and we do what we're trying to do and make the customer's experience better, we've improved our loyalty. Customer comes back to us more. All it takes is that one breach for people to step back and say, I can't trust them. So Rishi used the word trust. I think, Leslie, you used the word trust. I think trust is actually in the name of the webinar itself. I think that's actually the most important thing of all, is to make sure your customers know that when they decide to interact with you, they can trust you. And that actually has driven everything that we have been trying to do within this project. So loads of risks, but I've just taken the view that we run this as a project, and data protection is a very important risk that must be managed and maintained right throughout the entire life of the project. The end of the project becomes the rollout of the new systems. But even then, by socializing the concept of data privacy, what it then means is that on a day-to-day basis, our staff are actually treating the customers in the right manner. All right, so that would be my first take on what we're trying to do here and how we've approached the whole process from a very strict risk management process and try to keep it as strategic as possible. I'm also open to questions if people want to understand a little bit more. But Leslie, back to you.
So Alan, my apologies. My audio dropped off. I saw your lips stop moving, but I didn't get back your audio, so I can't hear you. Give me a thumbs up if you're wrapped up there. All right, so fantastic. So I caught 99% of that. Are you hearing me now?
Yes, I am.
All right, cool. So, right, fantastic. So it sounds like, Alan, you guys embarked on a journey, really putting the customer at the center of the entire organization. And to get there, you kind of stumbled onto privacy.
That's correct. It becomes something that you're immediately aware of. So even when we started to do very basic payment portals, you are aware of making sure that you have the right notices and the policies on the website so that people interacting with you are aware of how you wish to conduct business. So even at that very first touch point, you have to be aware of making sure that people understand what's happening, how you're going to treat them, how you're expecting their data to be used, etc. Okay, so as you start to then, as you said in your intro, as you start to then look across the entire group, what you have is a bunch of different regulators, all of whom want to review. You have a set of different laws. And in fact, what we ended up doing is instead of looking at each of the individual territories' data privacy laws, we actually took the view that GDPR would actually be the high watermark. Ultimately, that people would get there, which Barbados and Jamaica have actually now done that. They've got there. What we started by doing last year was saying, fine, we're going to shoot for GDPR. We're going to roll GDPR right across the group because that ultimately, I don't want to have different standards. I want to make sure that the group as a whole knows where it is and what is required. So whether it be Antigua, Jamaica, Trinidad, or Curacao, we have we're up to that level, and it has given us quite a lot of things to think about that we didn't expect around things like storage of data, etc. That it's you just have to know the information. You just have to know the requirements to work through them. So as I said, yes, I am a very boring accountant, but finance teaches you that risk is all about management and mitigation, and that is what you need to do. So in my new role as a VP Ops is just basically a glorified project manager. It is to run anything that you do as a big project, and therefore risk management becomes part of your day-to-day life. How are we addressing this? What do we get rid of? How do we make sure this doesn't happen? It's normal standard project management. And in this case, it is just getting very, very detailed to understand the requirements. So hence, as I said before, to big up Rishi, we actually got Rishi in to do our gap analysis because you might as well get somebody who's, well, as the best prophet, get the prophet in to actually be able to tell us, make that roadmap as clear and as detailed as possible for us. So that for those like me who don't necessarily have that detailed knowledge, we understand where we're going. And what I'm better use that where we have to socialize to make sure that people understand, that's where I can come into my own. So you help me understand, I can then make sure that I'm preaching to everybody within Guardian, this is what we require, this is how I need you to behave, this is how we treat customers. And again, so I'm trying to simplify it without actually diminishing just how massive a task it is. But that's what we've done. We've just taken it as another part of our project.
That socializing component, I mean, you stress on it quite a lot, and I think it's vital. And that's ultimately about changing the culture of the organization and how they view those things. Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay. Well, what we're trying to do actually for the whole of Guardian Group is we're trying to actually change the culture to a customer-facing one, so that if I say this, I don't mean to be rude, because I am Trini born and bred, but I don't think customer service is one of our strengths here in this island. All right. So one of the things from coming away with 30 years of experience outside was the shock of just what we what we tolerate as consumers. So if I put the hat on and I jump over the fence, some of the stuff that you get told as a consumer, you just sit down there and you think, that's not possible that you've just told me that. And so what we're trying to do is actually make Guardian better. Because again, all those things that Rishi put, the customer loyalty, the growth of business, etc., I think that will come. If we start to treat our customers as we believe they should be treated, all right, that all of that growth, etc., is going to come. So, but that culture does not happen overnight. So we've had to have a very, very specific group-wide strategy to do that. So that's included actually top-down retraining on mindsets, bottom-up inclusion workshops. So we have regular town halls. We talk. We have groups that actually talk amongst each other, so that and I know that sounds very basic, but just actually in increasing the communication at a horizontal level. All right. So again, the way that we are regulated in this country means that I have a general insurance company that's regulated and has requirements. I have a life insurance company that's regulated and has requirements. I have an asset management company that is regulated. So it's almost driven to be silos, right? So we have to break those silos down and actually then not just in Trinidad, but then reach across to the Barbados, to Trinidad, Jamaica, etc. So the whole culture change that we're trying to achieve is to make sure that that Guardian group, what I call a hammock, I don't know what others think, but that whole live easy swoosh, that actually is the one thing that we do have that's a group-wide insignia. And that's what we want to be able to rally around, to say that no matter if you are a client in Jamaica or Curacao, there is a Guardian way, there is a Guardian message. So we want to have minimum standards, etc. So we're actually doing a massive, as I said, series of workshops, etc. internally to get that up. The socialization of the fact that data is just become part of that rollout. So making sure you have the right mindset when dealing with customers, etc. That's just part of the mindset. It's just making sure that you're actually, they're trusting you with their data, and you have to treat it with the respect it deserves. That's what I'm trying to say.
That's fantastic insight, Alan. And I think a lot of people embark on a journey either from the strategy side or the technology side. And the technology side is really, is tried and tested, it's proven. But there's so many things that we skip over, in an attempt to get there. So fascinating. You did mention one thing, which I picked up on. And you said something along the lines of storage and where we stored our data. And you can tell us a little bit about that?
Again, you asked me a very technical question, and I'm watching Rishi's picture. So he'll obviously be able to help me with this. But in terms of from a strategic point of view, actually we have one of our risk mitigants is that we have business continuity plans. All right. So that an IT person will tell you that one of the easiest things to do is to actually store all of your data on servers that are out of country. Okay. But actually, under GDPR, that out of country has to be very specific. So it isn't just about reaching out to a country that says, okay, we trust your infrastructure, etc. So we want to put the server there. You actually now are bound by very specific countries and locations that you are allowed to hold that in. So it's beyond your normal BCP planning. So that's what I'm saying. It's just about having that detail. So it's not impossible. It's just that extra step that you've got to go. So actually, where we were planning to store all of our data for business continuity isn't part of GDPR. So it was, okay, well, we had to start thinking a different way now. That's what I meant by storage.
Yeah, no, that's spot on, Alan. Because so many vendors come to you and say, hey guys, let's put it into the cloud. And it's a bit of a black box, but what are the implications for you, right?
Correct.
Ultimately, you're accountable because it's your customers' data.
That's correct.
It's not quite that simple. Hey, Rish, you could switch your camera back on. Alan, that was fantastic. I just want to open up for a couple of questions. On my side, guys, Rish, I want to throw this one over to you. Alan, feel free to chime in. But in many countries, we operate across the entire territory. There aren't data protection laws, acts in operation as yet. So why should we care about this, Rish?
I think it's important to care about from several reasons. From a Caribbean point of view, one, they aren't there yet, but they're going to get there. From what I understand, the EU is really working throughout the region to get governments to really sign up to pass laws for GDPR, because I'm wearing my hat, formerly working in government, and I did some stuff with the Ministry of Trade a while back. And all these agreements that government is signing on to for the EU and Canada, we have in these trade agreements, they're building in terms that more or less says, if you want to do business with us, or if you have companies that want to do business with us, you now need to have the similar type of legislation here to be able to deal. So countries are slowly moving there. Two, the world is small. Everybody now is realizing that eventually we can't just do business alone in Trinidad or in Tobago or in Jamaica, but we have to expanding your network. And expanding your network, I think, means having best practices. And there are best practices. For me, it is a best practice to have. I mean, GDPR, yes, is the gold standard, but that has now been codified into a standard, the ISO standard. So if you have any people on the call, IT people on the call, they'll be familiar with the ISO standard 27001, that deals with information security management. Well, in 2019, just last year, the ISO came up with a new standard, working in conjunction with like Microsoft and EU and all those other big tech companies, called ISO 277001, so 27701, which is a substandard. And that deals specifically with privacy information system management. And when you read that standard, it's more or less GDPR cut and print in terms of the way that they've moved it. So it's now become a standard for organizations. So the same way you want to be ISO certified for your information security, you now would like to be ISO certified for your privacy information that you have built into it. So it's becoming that way, not only from a political point of view or economic point of view, but now from a standards point of view.
Fantastic, Rich. Now, I'm just going to roll over to one of these questions and it's open up to both of you guys. But I suspect this is more of a Rishi question. How does decentralizing data and data ownership factor into privacy and compliance? Meaning putting customers in greater control of their data to know what is held, making corrections, etc.
I think that's a good question, because I think what he's probably talking about is you probably have an interface where a customer could probably log in to see exactly, okay, what information you have on me and make corrections. I think from a privacy compliance point of view, then you need to look at it from a security point of view. So if somebody's logging onto our site, or you have a portal for them on your site to be able to, one app that they interact with, to be able to see, okay, all my policies or my purchases or whatever, it needs to be secured. It needs to be encrypted. So, obviously have that encryption in. Transmission to the server, to wherever the information held, needs to be encrypted. So who has access to that information? You'll also probably, I think, if you're allowing people to be able to change information about them, there needs to be some sort of verification. So also automatically then process also becomes important. So you've told me now that you've changed your name, you probably got a deed poll, and you've changed your name from Rishi Miraj to Malcolm X. Who knows? How do I know that's the correct name? You need to provide verification. So there also needs to be some verification built into that. The question, I guess, is giving customers control of their data and what the organization has. Yep, that's perfectly, that's what GDPR talks about, or privacy talks about. But to do that, you also need to have proper systems in place to be able to manage that from a security point of view, from a process point of view, from a verification point of view. So you know that me, Rishi Miraj, I am the one who's logged on. I'm the one who's making this information and making this change. And you can verify that this is me and not somebody impersonating me. So those security checkpoints or those procedure checkpoint needs to be put in place.
Fantastic.
Okay, we've actually, because obviously that's one of the parts of the things that we are doing, is we actually ensure that we have express consent from customers. But we believe in actually making sure if the customers see what data we have on them, they are able to change it. There are some aspects, again, it'll come down to some regulatory constraints as well. So if you did change your name to Malcolm X Rishi, you would actually probably have to come in. We wouldn't be able to do that just digitally. So absolutely, Rishi's right. What we put in are specific processes. So there are some things that they're allowed to change, and we have simple ticketing systems that will set up standard emails with attachments that the customer can attach to show more like proof of address, etc., that they can send in. But there are some areas in terms of our know your customer requirements that they still do have to come in.
Fantastic. And Rishi, I guess this is you, given you the privacy prophet. What's your 2-year prediction for companies? And I, question is Trinidad. I would ask for the region in successfully implementing data privacy programs.
Oh, I think, for companies in the Caribbean implementing data privacy program, I think it opens up a new sphere, new markets. Like I said, we see, you can't just depend on, and if I slowly wear my other fashion hat that you mentioned earlier, Clark, I told my wife earlier on, the kind of stuff that she's producing, it appeals to our market here in the Caribbean, but also appeals to a wider market. And any organization obviously wants to expand their customer base, expand their clientele base. So I think if you put data protection programs in place, so you're showing your compliance with whatever laws that exist in the US, in the EU, in Latin America, Central America, since they're close to us, you're showing that we hold ourselves to a high standard. Mm-hmm. So it opens up a lot more markets, a lot more portals, a lot more clientele to you. And at the end of the day, it allows you, return on investment, make more money.
Fantastic. Alan, where are you guys going to be in 5 years?
Hopefully, we're doing more than 80% of our transactions digitally. But I think our industry is one that you do require face-to-face. But mm-hmm. What we are trying to do is make sure that we do everything that is easy to do in a digital way in that space. And therefore, all of that will come under all of our data privacy policies, etc.
Fantastic. All right, guys. So we just have a couple of minutes. So I want to open up for a couple of closing comments. Rish, any closing comments?
My closing comment, I think, goes back to my opening comments, and the main gist of this whole webinar was trust. For me, it's about it comes down to trust. Organizations interacting with their customers, their clients, their employees. Because I think most people when they hear data protection, they're thinking, okay, it's just customers and clients, but we also hold a lot of personal data on employees. So it's about for me, trust and creating that culture of trust, that ethos of trust within the organization. Like I said, it's not a tick box measure. Mm-hmm. We just okay, we have data policies, cool, check. We have retention policies, check. We have a privacy notice, check. Okay, we've clicked all the check box. What regulators are now saying on best practices, you must not only be seen to do data protection, but actually do it. And that requires a culture change. So it's about, yes, it's easy to write policies and do those things, but to get that culture change of people understanding, why we do what we do and valuing the culture, valuing the data. For me, getting your CSRs to realize this is valuable, not only for customers mm-hmm. and clients, but for me, because I also want to trust the company I work with is handling my data properly. So it's about engendering trust throughout the organization.
Data privacy, data trust, it's all good business. I have one more question, and I'll ask you guys if you could. Is there a KYC requirement for insurance companies, and yes. What's being done on an electronic KYC and sharing KYC information?
Well, KYC is KYC, so I don't know that there's necessarily a distinction between eKYC and KYC. If I'm putting my own definition, but your questioner might have a different definition of eKYC, but mm-hmm. KYC is KYC. You have a requirement to understand what your customer does. In terms of sharing the data, it's like anything else. We are in constant conversation with regulators, but we are constrained by regulatory requirements. So at this point, we have to make sure that our customer information for separate regulated entities are kept separate for customer confidentiality. So that there are still constraints that will not allow us to go all the way in terms of what we would want to do in terms of digital innovation. But as I said, they're just constraints. You've got to know the constraints and operate within those. But it's only through conversations with regulators and potentially getting them to soften their current stance. But as I'm aware right now, if I have a general insurance company, a general insurance customer, and I have details on that customer, I am not allowed to share that with my life company or my asset management company, okay, for confidentiality rules. So as I said, we talk to our regulator on a regular basis, but I don't know that where that will end up.
Yeah. But it sounds like even beyond that, you guys are actually trying to stay ahead of the game, not just waiting to be wagged by the regulator.
Well, I think you have to do that. Again,
Yeah.
As Rishi said, the last thing you want is to have a breach or for something to get out that suggests that you're not actually treating the data appropriately. All right. So again, I think one of the things that Rishi talked about, brand value. Guardian has actually, I think, a very high brand value in this country. And the last thing I would want to do is breach a regulator. Because that undermines everything as far as I'm concerned. That isn't even 5 minutes. That's an immediate loss of value to the brand and the customer trust.
Fantastic. Alan, so final closing comments. Any advice to your colleagues?
Just treat your customers with respect. And part of that respect is making sure you understand what their data means to them. So put yourself in their shoes and actually treat their data as how you would want your data treated.
Golden rule. Fantastic. So I had a terrific time with the webinar, guys. Alan, Rishi, very insightful presentations. I think we got to all the questions, so that's fantastic. I just wanted to thank you guys again for sharing your time and sharing your expertise and your experiences with us. And thank all of the attendees for joining. We do have a follow-on webinar to this, scaling a culture of analytics, governance, agility, proficiency, and community. So look out for the invitation. Guys, thank you so much and happy Friday.
Have a great week.
Thank you for having us. Everybody have a good time.
I know.
Be safe.
All right.